know that today is a day that's a second day running. It will be a 3-day period of mourning. A former UN Secretary General, Kofi Annan, and the funeral rites, they started officially today, but even though we received his body at the Kotoka International Airport yesterday, and from now, the caskets will be open from, I believe, the next 1 hour and a half or 45 minutes for public viewing by the general public. So you can go to the Accra International Conference Center, you can file pass, and ahead of that, we want to hear from someone who worked with him for a majority of his life. Ambassador Victor Gbeho is speaking to Kojo today.
Kofi Annan begins his triumphant journey home. And as we all are reluctant to say goodbye to him, we're equally eager to learn as much as we can about the great man who lived most of his life outside Ghana. And as we learn more and more about him, we have encountered a man whose career has also been just as illustrious as a diplomat and a politician. But fortunately for us, he's someone who has known Kofi Annan since the 60s, where in his home, just about half a mile away from the airport where Kofi Annan has landed on many occasions on his return journeys to Ghana. His final return journey this week, as his remains are brought home to begin the funeral activities. The man whose home we're in, himself a career diplomat, himself a man whose career has spanned decades, is Mr. James Victor Gbeho. Let's learn what we can about Kofi Annan from this man. Hello, sir, and good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for welcoming us into your beautiful
The pleasure is all mine.
Now, I mentioned that you've known Mr. Kofi Annan since the 60s. That's a way back. Under what circumstances did you get to know each other?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to say a few words on the occasion of the funeral of my late friend and colleague. And I'd like to say how sad a day it is for all of us. I do hope that we are able to give him a fitting funeral, befitting a statesman that he was. Yes, I've known Kofi Annan since the early 60s. We didn't go to the same school. He went to Mfansipim and I went to Achimota. But our paths did cross very early on when he finished college and joined the UN in Geneva. I had just become a diplomat in Ghana also. And for young people, it didn't take long for us to get to know each other. But I got to know Kofi Annan much better later on when I served at the UN, first in the early 60s, and then after a decade as ambassador of Ghana to the United Nations. Kofi Annan was in the Secretariat of the UN there, and there was so a lot of interaction between us. What is more, soon after I went as ambassador, Kofi Annan became the head of the peacekeeping department of the United Nations. And as you know, Ghana has always been interested and active on peacekeeping around the globe, which meant that we had to consult with the UN quite often. And it was a joy to meet and discuss with Kofi.
And of course, you must have stayed close throughout.
Yes, yes. We have been friends, but more than that, we were colleagues. And I was attracted very much to him because of his professionalism. He was a diplomat of diplomats. He was gifted, with dealing with other human beings, and also it was a joy to learn from him at every meeting that we had together.
He was so soft-spoken. Is that how he was in private life as well, or was it a tool he employed for his job?
No. I think that he is a calm person. He is very circumspect, and he always thinks carefully about what to say before he says it. And that way, he is respected by many. And also because he worked in the Secretariat. Now, in diplomacy, you have diplomats like I was, speaking out loud and so on. But then you had on the other side the United Nations, which is an international civil service. And those who are there are the servants of the international community, so to speak. And they are usually soft-spoken. They serve and are happy to help others with problems or to execute decisions made by politicians and so on. And this is how Kofi came out to everybody, and he was liked by many.
Of course, the reason why he's being celebrated by many in death is because of that big job that he held, the UN Secretary General. I remember in the late 90s when it was announced, how excited we all were as young people. We referred to him as the president of the world because of the central nature of that position. Do you recall how it felt when the news was announced, when Ghana was placed on the map in that way? Did you know it was going to happen? Or how do you recall feeling at the time?
Well, it's interesting that you should ask me this because I played a role in the campaign of Kofi Annan. Right from the moment when he talked to the then president of Ghana, Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, about becoming a Secretary General, and the president agreed that he should be a Ghana candidate. He was also directed to come and see me about handling his campaign. And so between Minister Honorable Ibn Chambers and myself, we formed a campaign team or campaign manager. I went to certain countries in Africa. He went to the Middle East and so on, all asking them to support the candidature of President Kofi Annan. And eventually I ended up at the UN in New York, talking to diplomats about the likelihood of the organization profiting from the selection of Kofi Annan. And then gradually the elections were held and he won. After that, we consulted on several occasions. Now, later on, I served a term as the president of the ECOWAS Commission, and he was always available to, help me with certain decisions and encouragement and so on. And he was just a very nice person to be around. He was carved for international work, and he genuinely believed in peace and security and bringing people together. He was often worried about the late development of Africa on the international scale, but he also felt that Africans were confident people and would make it in the long run. He did help out in certain areas, and as we know, he was not only involved in peacekeeping, but he drew attention throughout his tenure to Africa. You know, many people before Kofi Annan became the Secretary General thought about Europe and other parts of the world. But when Kofi Annan became Secretary General, the world's focus was on Africa and what Africa could do for the international community. I think that was the contribution of Kofi Annan.
It's wonderful. In fact, it's quite revealing to learn that you played quite a role in his obtaining the position, you and of course Mr. Ibn Chambers, sort of campaign managers, if you will, for him. That's wonderful. Tell me about the work of a diplomat at that level, because you know quite a bit about it. You've talked about your heading the ECOWAS Commission. That's an international organization like the UN. So talk to me about the job he had to do. Was it difficult?
To say it's difficult is to put it mildly. Kofi, of course, had received some training because he was already an employee of the UN. And also let me mention that he was the first UN staffer to become Secretary General. It had never happened before, and I don't think it's going to happen for a long time to come also. It's usually a post that is occupied by politicians from different countries and so on.
What does that say of Kofi Annan, the fact that he was chosen in that way?
Yes. I think that when Boutros Ghali, the former foreign minister of Egypt, became Secretary General, it was for theoretically for a term, 2 terms. However, for some reason or the other, which we will not go into at this time, it was felt that Africa should contribute another Secretary General. And the lot came to Kofi Annan and others to vie for the post. But eventually, Kofi won hands down, you know, and I believe that Africa was well served by his tenure.
So you were telling us how difficult the job is.
Oh, yes. Now, the highest body in the UN system is, of course, the Security Council. The Security Council is the topmost organization. It is made up of only a handful of countries. Originally, it was those who guaranteed security of the world immediately after the Second World War. Britain, America, France, and so on. And so everything concerning international peace and security had to be decided by the Security Council. And it wasn't easy to be the Secretary General among member states who did not agree on everything. And what is more also, if you remember, the late 90s and the beginning of the 20s were very turbulent times in Africa. The 90s throughout, we had trouble spots in West Africa especially, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and so on. And so to be a Secretary General at the time, you had to keep an eye on all this to try and execute the decisions that the Security Council had taken, and to generally ensure that peace prevailed. And that was not easy for anyone, especially the Secretary General. As you know, there was a lot of interest in the African Secretary General, because many people in the other part of the world did not necessarily believe in the leadership of Africa. But I think Kofi proved them all wrong. Kofi's tenure as Secretary General will go down in history as one of the best since the UN was founded. Not only was he there to help manage peace and security, but he took interest in individual countries. He helped Ghana in its relations with other countries, so that Ghana could profit from the experiences of other countries and so on. And of course, he also came under criticism. We all know about what happened in Rwanda, but we all know also that he was the scapegoat. I don't know why the international community, especially the Western countries, concentrate so much on the criticism of a Secretary General when members of the Security Council and the President of the Security Council and the decisions of the Security Council were there to be seen by all. But on the whole, Kofi Annan acquitted himself creditably in a job that required you to be awake 24 hours, because while Africa is asleep, other parts of the world are awake, and you always
trouble.
That's right.
Do you think he was discriminated against because he was from Africa?
Not overtly, because discrimination is something that is frowned upon in the UN system. The UN constitution is against discrimination and so on. But having said that, we all know that there is a certain amount of discrimination. But what helped is that Kofi himself was not a man who believed in discrimination. Kofi himself embraced all races. As you know, he was married to a non-Ghanaian, a European, and so on. And he didn't make one iota of difference for him which race you came from. It is your delivery that was important for him. Not only that, when Kofi was appointed Secretary General, he formed a team in his office which comprised people from other parts of the world, Asia and Europe and so on. So he had a truly international bureau, to work with, and it was difficult to discriminate against him.
Let's talk about some of the particular moments of his life where you were present. Soon after his appointment, you returned in triumph to Ghana. The president at the time, Lieutenant Rawlings, sent a delegation to meet